figure, which was something I kind of did during school, but was really apprehensive. It felt completely alien for reasons obvious. And so in January, I found out I had a show in September. So this whole show was done during a 9-month period, which completely evolved. It's the longest amount of time I've spent on a body of work, so it definitely has a lot of different elements from my life involved in it. So I wanted to work the male figure, and I asked one of my really good guy friends to pose for me, and my boyfriend at the time was like, "You can't do that, can't go and see another guy," you know? And I was like, "Well, then are you going to pose for me?" And he agreed. And so at that moment, it turned into this idea of comparing the male and female figure, which is obviously romantic on any level. So this is the first piece, and it came out of a photo session with him, and we were together at the time, and during the process of painting these, we broke up. And so that was a huge event in my life, and it changed who I am on many levels, and soon became the whole idea for the show. So this piece and that piece on the wall are the result of that photo session. And so after my model was gone, I needed to figure out where the rest of the show was going to go. And I had the idea of maybe asking other couples I knew to pose for me, and decided that wasn't really personal enough. And so I had this really close friend who was going through a really bad breakup at the same time. And I asked her to pose for me, and that's the only female in the show that's not me, and that's on the opposite side of this wall. And it was the first time that I've had a model and used her as her own story and not talking about myself through her. So talking about her relationship and her breakup was very therapeutic. And after going through that with that female, I decided that it was imperative to go back to the self-portrait and really analyze the effects of this relationship and why it was so monumental in my life. So at that point, I brought in all of this fabric, and it's kind of, I've always worked with fabric on some level, but in this show it became, in some pieces I feel like it's more important than the figure itself. So I started using this perspective when I was doing my photo shoot of an aerial shot, like setting up my tripod and shooting downwards. So that completely eradicated these plain backgrounds I'd been using, so I was forced to work with the ground literally now. So that was the impetus for all this fabric in the background. And during that same time, I really need to investigate the importance of fabric through history, and I had a group critique with some really good friends, and they mentioned to look more into Renaissance work than I had been. And so I got really into Flemish work from the 14th, 15th century, and while I was looking at that work, it's hard not to really understand that it's completely religious. And I love Jesus, I think he's cool, but it's not about him, and it's not about all of those religious implications. But the idea of that narrative and that blatant expression of emotion, Mary's weeping over this dead body, you don't see that in contemporary art anymore, because it's cheesy or it's too dramatic. And so I was really, really impassioned by this emotion that they were displaying. So I moved on to this wall, and whenever I work, I start a show, I think about the space I'm in. And so I've really gotten into this idea of making the paintings on a wall speak as a whole and as a narrative. And so along with the titles, they began to flow into sentences. And so this wall is understanding this, death of the Virgin. And I'm not comparing myself to the Virgin Mary by any means, but it was this idea that through that relationship, this virginal innocence that I had, like a quality of mine, was definitely killed and taken away. And so I kind of went to this basic 3 colors that in history they're kind of the most primary colors you can have, which is red, black, and white. And that kind of describes the basic fundamental start of that. And then we moved on to this wall, and totally became obsessed with color, and almost nervous to throw it in the way that I did, but I decided that it was important. And so this wall reads, "Anxiety heavy, changes inciting her resurrection." So it went from death to being resurrected for this process of healing and dealing with everything that had happened. And I'm going to leave it there and open up to questions. So. Go for it.
So all of these paintings and these are all you?
Yeah, these are all self-portraits. And these are me with him.
So when you say resurrection, coming out of breakup?
Yeah, coming out of the depression of it, like the heavy weight, and understanding and learning and growing from it.
Why did you choose to split canvases?
And that's kind of another subject matter too. I was in the process of forming the conceptual idea. I decided to put meaning into the numbers that I was using, as in the dimensions on the canvas. So everything kind of revolves around the number 27. It was his age. It was the day I found out I got into grad school. It's kind of been a huge number for me. So on these walls, it's 27 by 72, and as it's broken up, there's a 3/8 divide. It's 12 and 12, with 3 is 27. So visually, they all look the same size, but they're being broken up, which is kind of symbolic of, emotional things kind of tearing you apart and still being whole, but separated. So, and as far as using the figure and cropping the figure, it was interesting. How I was learning to line up the figure and making kind of edges meet. So as the figure works, it becomes a whole. Being separated, it kind of flows. And I worked on that.
I know Jenny's work intimately, and so I have lots of questions that I can ask. I hope that there's more, but most people might not be familiar with the format that you really use and have kind of created a signature with, and that's the vertical canvas. And so to me, it was really refreshing to see a horizontal piece, and I just want you to talk a little bit about making that break, or how you thought about that conceptually as you're going into this.
Yeah, and it still has that very linear quality that these do. It actually was derived from the photograph itself, and I really wanted to work with that hand clasp, but the lower parts of the body just didn't flow the same way. So it was basically really because I really wanted to use that pose, and so it became a narrative this way instead of that way. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be another horizontal and how it would flow into it, but the photo session is really important. A lot of things happen within that space, and it's like you're acting and you're performing. And when I'm just using myself, I have a digital camera and I set a timer, so I just pose underneath it and then run back and look at it and pose. So it's this huge action, and all of these emotions come out during that process. So it definitely influences my original little sketch. It happens.
I had a comment and a question when you talked about how the lining up with the bodies, and I just think that's really, I love what you did with that, because it kind of symbolizes this, like, each body is individual in each canvas, but at the same time they're linked, and it represents the kind of universality that really, really personal work can have. It's like the deeper you go into yourself, the more universal the message becomes, and that's what I think is really strong about this work. So I really want to commend you for that.
Well, it's always a stress, and even like standing up and talking about oh, this is about my breakup, and just hoping that people don't think it's cheesy or can relate to it, So it's always, and I can't not work from a personal place. Like even when I started the idea of working with the male, I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I mean, it was just heaven sent that it was with this person that I was involved with, and it became about us and the situation. So.
Any other questions? That's way too short for Jenny to talk. Jean's like, it's okay. I would like you to tell us a little bit about your experience in Washington this summer. Jenny was selected for a national portraiture competition that was the grand reopening of the National Gallery, and got to go visit and participate in that. And I don't know if you talked to anybody about that really in depth, but tell us a little bit about that experience.
So I invited my parents, of course, and so we went to Washington, and we were walking up the stairs, and we got there a little bit early, and they're like, oh, you can walk around, look at stuff, we're not set up yet. So I'm walking around, and the first room I go into, there's Hopper and George O'Keeffe, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in this museum with these people that I have been studying, so it's definitely at that moment I understood like the immensity of it. And walking out and signing in, they give you, if you're an artist, they give you a little glow-in-the-dark wristband. So you were literally walking around glowing all night, and you could identify, the artist and start conversations, which I didn't really do. But and so walking into the initial show, I was just floored at the amount of talent that was around me. And part of me was like, do I really deserve to be here? There was some amazing work. And so they kind of just let you wander around for an hour and a half and look at everything. And actually spotted this painting by this guy I went to high school with that I totally admired when I was in school, and we were in the show together, so I tracked him down, and he's in New York, and he's probably not going to call me. But and then at the end of the night, they're like, okay, well, let's paint, and so we went to the third floor, and they had a full bar and hip-hop music and a dance floor, and near the end of the night, they played all these oldies, and I witnessed my parents doing the twist, which was great. And at the end of the night, I slow danced with my dad, which was a huge moment because he was the reason that I'm there, and so it was beautiful, and I wouldn't take back a second of it. So I feel extremely lucky to have had that experience.
You are so ingrained in your work. I mean, it's just incredible, and I was not aware of it, to be honest with you, and I just think it's fabulous. But where do you see yourself evolving from this point?
Actually, like in school right now, I really want to start painting. I'm having a problem trying to find wood because I don't sell redwood on the East Coast, which is what I make my frames from. And I was calling around, and finally the last guy was like, where can I find this wood? He's like, try California. Okay. So once I can find some wood to make my frames, I want to focus completely on fabric. And so my first painting, I'm just going to take away the figure altogether and just investigate the meaning of color and the movement and why I'm so fascinated with it. So I don't know how long that will stick, so I'll probably yearn for that figure again, but it's definitely my next direction. And I just started reading this book called Blue, A History of Color, and this art historian tracks the meaning and usage of color through history, kind of following the color blue because it has an interesting path and he compares other colors to it. And he was talking about how the first kind of triad in primary colors, he said, are red, black, and white. And that's kind of where a lot of our symbolism comes from. White now means purity because when you make cloth, it's wool, so it starts out being white and pure. Red was the easiest color to dye. It was used from matter, and so that meant power and evolution and humans controlling the situation. And black is soiled and dirty, so that's where that negative connotation comes from. And in the usage of color, color didn't really come in until about the 11th or 12th century, and blue wasn't even popular until about the 15th. You don't see it in Greece or in Byzantine work very much. So that was extremely interesting. So I'm really getting into the history of color and how it affects. So.
Tell us a little about the program that you're entering into, just why you wanted to go to the school. I understand that the school you're going to was one of your top choices for graduate school.
Yeah, well, number one, it's in New York, and I wanted to tackle that beast while I was young and, and just deal with it on that level. So it was in New York, and when I visited, the one line I remember the person saying is that we're workers here. Like, we're not very academic as compared to like Columbia or Rhode Island. They're very academic. we're workers, so we're always going to be in our studio. And I was like, okay, I can do that, you know. So it's a very open program. I've had 2 classes so far. The first professor just kind of lectures about 15 minutes, then meets with everyone individually, and so I'm excited. There's a lot of freedom within it, so yeah.
Why do you use redwood?
It's temperature treated, so it doesn't bend through elements. If you ship it to the East Coast where it's humid, it's probably not going to warp. It's usually cut extremely straight, and it's a soft wood. It's easy to staple and drill into.